You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
Hi, everybody. About a year ago, one of our boys, as a Christmas present, gave me one of those subscription gifts where you get a question every week and you answer it in story form. Great questions. And then at the end of it, you have sort of a little book about your life, at least in regard to the questions that were asked. Turned out great. So every once in a while, I'm going to read one of those questions out of the book. And this morning, I just happened to open it to this particular one. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. It's a great question. So I'm going to read you it. They don't last very long. And then I'm going to tell you a story that is embedded inside the question. So the question is, would you prefer to have an adventure or read about one? The basic answer is, it depends. Over my life, there have been adventures that I would rather read about. Most of those, I'm glad I did them after the fact, but I am not interested in doing them again. For example, I went parasailing, ended up 800 feet above the boat I was being pulled behind. That's 80 stories in the air. And there's a completely different wind current up there, and times when I seemed I would take a dive because the lag in the rope pulling me sagged dangerously. In fact, I was thinking in my mind about the kites that I had always flown that ended up doing this thing where they took a dive toward the ground and some of them just crashed. Climbing a mountain sounds wonderful when you read about it, but it can be very arduous and difficult, especially when your boots turn out to be ill-fitting and your feet begin to bleed. Deep sea fishing is fantastic until you get seasick on the way out of the bay and you're going to be out there for 8 hours. True story. Worse, when one of the crew decides to eat his bacon sandwich right in front of you. Sometimes I think we idealize an adventure and remain ignorant about all that it will include, like mosquitoes or getting lost or poisonous snakes or almost dying in a storm on the ocean. But I would much rather go up in a helicopter than read about it, or on a pontoon boat, or fishing if I'm not seasick, or climbing a rock wall, and many other adventures. I do like them, but I like them comfortably. I know there are a lot of folks out there who just live for adventure. Well, good on you. Somebody asked me one time, what's been your career? I really don't have one. I've kind of done everything that was in front of me. But one of the things that I do like is to climb into other people's passions. So I don't go out and golf by myself or, that's not one of my passions, but I do like to do it, especially when a friend asks me to do it. So it's stuff like that. I do like to target practice with a gun. I don't have one. So about the question, would I rather read about it? And I love to read about it. Or would I rather go on an adventure? And the answer again is, it depends. At my age, some adventures are too arduous, but if you propose something, I'll think about it, certainly give it a think, and let you know. So inside my response about this question, I happened to mention almost dying on the ocean. And that goes back, I was 19? And I went and did a missions trip to the Philippine Islands. And I love the Philippines. And I love the Filipino people. They are a warm culture. They embrace you right off the start. I was probably about 5'6", maybe 5'7" at the time. I've shrunk. I got married and settled down. But when I was in the Philippines, I was the center. And they have this avid love for basketball. And it's everywhere. So I played center. I was the tallest person on the court, which is an odd experience if you've been short your whole life. One of the things that we did on that trip was Jerry Matheson, who's a Canadian like me, and I were on the same excursion. It went from a city called Dajungas, or General Santos City, which is at the south end of Mindanao, the south big island of the Philippines. And we were going to go take a ferry all the way from General Santos City for about 8 hours along the coastline to a little Bible school that was on Mindanao. The next day, Jerry and I would go over to the two most southern islands in the Philippines. One is Balut and one is Sarangani. And we would speak there One day we would be on one island, and the other day we would be on the other island. Then we'd go back and spend some time at the Bible school and wait for the ferry to take us back to General Santos City. So that was the idea. We got to the Bible school. It's fine, 8-hour ferry ride. Now, one of the things you have to understand, at that time, there was no communication between the Bible school and General Santos City, or Sarangani and Balut to General Santos City. No communication whatsoever. No landlines, no electronics. I mean, I was 19 years old. That's a long time ago. That was over 50 years ago, and things have changed a lot. But the other thing you need to know is that Jerry is basically deaf. He has hearing aids that help him, but when he takes them off, it's all about sign language, if you know it, which I don't, or him reading lips, and that's important to the story. So we make it to the Bible school. We did some tininkling, which is the Filipino dance, and by the time we were done that summer, we were both pretty proficient in it. If you're not good at tininkling, you get your ankles slapped between two sticks, so you learn fast. We had a great night. Took the boat. It's about, 2 miles across the ocean. It was a calm day. Everything was great. Made it to Balut. I think it was to Balut. As you're facing the islands, it would be to the right-hand side. And from the top of Balut, not a big island, we were able to trek up to the very top of it. And when we broke out of the jungle, guess what? There was a basketball court right there. But from the top, you can look down and see the most northern islands of Indonesia. Well, we spent a night there. It was great. Wonderful, actually. Then the next morning, the goal was to get into the Filipino outrigger and go over to Sarangani. But there was a storm, a pretty rough storm. And so the Indonesian outrigger goes up at the back. The engine is there, and it has a spoke that goes out with the, I don't know what you call these things, but it turns the rotor, a small little engine. And the Filipino one is just flat. You don't have anything that goes up. You're at the exposure of the wind and the ocean and all that. They just thought it was too dangerous, so we spent another night there. The next day, it was quite more calm, and so we decided to go over to Sarangani. Now, also, this piece of water, this 1 to 2 mile stretch, that little piece of water is one of the most shark-infested pieces of ocean anywhere. But we weren't worried about that. I mean, we're just going to go 2 miles, or whatever it is, across the ocean here, back to the Bible school, and then the next day, whenever the ferry came by, we would take it back to General Santos City. It was Monday. So we get in the outrigger. There's about, 7 of us, Jerry and I, and 5 Filipino young men, including the one at the back. And in this outrigger, we find out later that there had been a boat that got lost in the middle of a storm in that same section and carried out to the ocean because the currents are really strong. And it took a few days to rescue, but it was in Reader's Digest, if I remember. And the only survivor was a woman who had, when the boat sank out in the ocean, a giant sea tortoise had come up under her for a couple days until she was spotted by the Coast Guard and rescued. I've never looked it up to see if that's actually true, but that's what I've heard. Anyway, we got in the boat to go across. It seemed like it was calmer there. And the current, like I said, is very strong. All we had to do was go, was half a mile over to Sarangani. We get out into the middle of that stretch of water between Balut and Sarangani, and the storm hits in a ferocious sort of way, and a fog descends, and all we've got is 5 Filipinos and Jerry Matheson and I in the boat. Then things got crazy because we couldn't see from one end of the outrigger to the other. The fog was so dense, so we had no idea where we were going, whether we were going deeper into the ocean, whether we were going toward the island of Mindanao, or whether we were going over to Sarangani still. And we've got this little engine. And the waves start piling up, and they're coming from both directions because the winds are bringing the waves up contrary to where the current was going. And then I find out that these 5 Filipino young men don't know how to swim. And you'd think, these people live on the ocean. They fish all the time and they don't know how to swim. I was a lifeguard when I was 16, 17 years old. So I'm thinking like, man, if we flip over, I know I'm going to try to save one of these guys, and I'm going to drown in the process because I don't even know which direction to swim. And there's the sharks, which is not a fun imagination. So we get going. I'm in the middle of the boat. And so when the current comes across and the wind the other way and it lifts up a big wave, I am literally crawling out on one of the wings to try to keep it from flipping the boat. And the fellow at the back is running his engine really hard when we have to go right through a wave. And I'm thinking like, there's not much gas in that thing. What are we going to do? And the Filipino young men are freaking out. Well, they don't know how to swim. And that's a good reason to freak out. We don't know where we're going. We're about, 2 hours out there, and we still have gas, which is sort of a miracle as far as I'm concerned. And the rudder snaps. Now we don't even have control of the boat at all. And we're sort of in a quandary about this whole thing. And I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm going to die. And my life flashes before my eyes, which does not take a long time. I'm 19 years old. And I don't know what to do. Trying to keep the boat from flipping, and it's small, and we're at the mercy of the ocean, and I don't know what to do. So I decide to sing. You're in one of these situations. What do you do? So at the top of my lungs, I sing, "Here comes Jesus, see him walking on the water. He'll lift you up and he'll help you to stand. Here comes Jesus, he's the master of the waves that roll. Here comes Jesus, he'll save your soul." It's the first song that popped into my mind, and it seemed pretty appropriate. So this peace descends on the boat, not the water. The water's still nuts. And about 10 minutes later, we crash into something. We can't even see what it is because the fog is still so dense. And we had arrived at Sarangani, the other island, and right up onto the shore, and right smack in front of a little church that was built on the shore. And we crawl out. We are so tired. And we basically crawl into this church to get away from the storm. And somebody sees us, and the word goes out on the island. They're here, they're here. So everybody shows up, and we basically talk, and the guys sing, and we just fall asleep in the church. Next day, glassy sea, no waves, nothing. We make it over to the mainland, Mindanao mainland. And the next day, the ferry comes by, picks us up, and takes us back to the Jungas, General Santos City. As we're pulling into the dock, we see the pastor waving his arms and running toward us, yelling something. And when we finally can hear him, he's yelling, "What happened on Monday? What happened on Monday? What happened on Monday?" And we are kind of curious about it because remember, there's no communication. Nobody knows about our Monday adventure. And he gets to us and he says, "What happened on Monday?" And we're like, "Oh, why are you asking?" He said, "Well, Sunday night, their house girl, Bathsheba, she had a dream. And in the dream, she saw Jerry almost underwater, and his nose was basically sticking out, and he was reaching up with his hand, and he was saying, 'Help me, help me, help me.'" So the entire church had fasted all day Monday and prayed for us. It's a miracle. It was participation. It was the kindness of God who climbed into an ocean storm and cared for us. Well, in retrospect, it's a great story and it's a great adventure. But frankly, wouldn't want to do it again. And so, would I rather read about an adventure or go on one? Well, it depends. Thank you for listening. If you would like to connect with us with inquiries, comments, suggestions, stories, and more, please go to paulyoungpodcast.com. There you're going to find resources and any notes related to any particular podcast. Today, participate with love, do the next right thing, and trust the ripples.